What's going on, guys, and welcome back to another video. You guys have been commenting on all of my videos, asking me in my Discord, Hammer, how is my class going to perform in TBC Anniversary Phase 1? So I decided that I wasn't going to do this originally, but I'm going to make a DPS tier list. However, I want to preface this video by saying, play what you're gonna have the most fun on. You don't need to follow a meta. Pretty much every single class and spec is viable for something in the Burning Crusade, right? So take these numbers with a grain of salt. I don't really enjoy making these tier lists because I feel like it funnels people into playing like 2 or 3 classes, and that's just not the case. In TBC, it's very important to bring one of pretty much each spec because you bring something very unique to the raid. So this DPS tier list that we're going to make is going to be based on WoW Sims for a 60-second boss fight, right? So that means some guilds are going to have 2-minute long boss fights, some are going to have 1.5 minutes, some are going to have 60 seconds, some are going to have 3 minutes. This is going to change a little bit based on the kill times and your group composition and all of that, but for some perfect simming numbers for a 60-second boss fight, this is your DPS tier list. And before we jump into this, guys, follow me over on Twitch, twitch.tv/hammerdance. We're pushing for Twitch partner. We're going to be live all throughout the launch, the days following the launch. Our normal stream times are Monday through Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern time, but the days following launch, we're going to be live pretty much all day. So give me a follow over there and come hang out. We're going to be having a great time leveling to level 70. Anyways, without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, so here we are on the DPS tier list maker for TBC, and we're going to start off with our Feral Druids. Now, our Feral Druids are simming somewhere in the middle around 2,500 DPS. So Feral is going to sit pretty comfy at B tier right here. You know, they're not terrible. They're not the best. They bring a crap load of utility to the raid. Absolutely going to be beneficial to bring. And then next up on the list, we have everyone's favorite, what is just all over TBC Anniversary right now, especially on Horde Nightslayer, is the Retribution Paladin, right? Ret Pallies are simming just about the same as Feral Druids. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're playing Ret Pally, you can't pump and find yourself up in the A or S tier in your specific raid. But remember, these numbers are coming from like perfect sims, meaning that every single person in the raid is playing perfectly. Your BM hunters are melee weaving, your warriors are pumping. Everyone is doing everything perfect in that raid. And in that scenario, that is where this tier list would, you know, kind of be a thing and actually be accurate. So just don't be like, oh, I'm not going to play Ret now because they're simming in the B tier. They're going to be right next to Feral Druids down in that B tier in a perfect scenario. In your raid, you might be one of the best players and you may be on Ret and you may be pumping S tier amounts of damage in your raid. Remember that. So don't let this deter you from playing any specific class, right? Now, next up, we have my personal favorite, which is the Fury Warrior. Now, as you guys probably know, you saw I was streaming it all live. I played Fury Warrior a lot on the PTR, did all the raids multiple times. I had this feeling that this time around, getting post-nerf raids, that the kill times are going to be quicker and Fury was going to be pumping even harder than it did last time, and I was right? Death Wish Fury is insane. You have such a high uptime on Death Wish because the boss fights are so much quicker that Fury is absolutely dominating, right? Fury is going to be up in the S tier, in my opinion, in terms of raw damage output. They bring that improved battle shout, and they just put out crazy damage numbers. The thing is, there's a lot of warriors left over from Anniversary. A lot of those warrior players re-rolled into hunters and warlocks because that is the easiest, you know, pumper DPS to bring forward into the Burning Crusade in Phase 1. You got to also remember, these are Phase 1 numbers, okay? Like I said, I get a little crazy with making tier lists. I don't really enjoy making them anymore because I feel like I really do deter a lot of people from playing certain classes, and I don't want you guys to think that way with this video. Every single class and spec is valuable in TBC, and I cannot stress that enough. Next up, we have another warrior spec. That's going to be the Arms Warrior, right? Arms Warrior brings Blood Frenzy, which is massive to improve raid DPS. So every single 25-man raid comp should be bringing at least one Arms Warrior, whether they're two-handed, whether they're dual-wielding, which would be a kebab. You know, Arms Warrior is extremely valuable for raid, and I'm going to put Arms Warrior, they're going to actually be at like either the bottom of the A tier or the top of the B tier. They're extremely valuable. They do respectable damage, and again, they bring that debuff that is just so incredibly valuable to the raid. Next up, we have our Boomkins, right? Another really valuable class that every single raid group is going to need. You're going to put your Boomkin in your Arcane Mage group or your Destro Lock group to give them that crit buff. You're going to have your innervates from your boomkin as well, your fairy fire. They are just incredibly valuable to every single raid. However, their damage is just, they're kind of on the lower end, right? I'm going to put boomkins at the bottom of the B tier. That's just because of their raw damage numbers. But in terms of utility, I mean, boomkins bring more utility to a raid than fury. So that's, you know, having your arcane mages and your destro locks pump even harder is extremely important. So make sure you are bringing a boomkin to your raids. Next up on the list here, we have the Elemental Shaman, right? Elemental Shaman is going to be, you know, obviously very valuable. You still need shamans in every single group for totems. Even though Bloodlust is raid-wide, you still need to have a shaman in every single group for those totem buffs, which are massive, especially for 25-man raids. Every single group, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all 5 of those groups is going to need a shaman of some sort, whether it's enhancement, resto, or elemental for those totem buffs. As far as raw output damage, if the entire raid is playing perfectly, elemental shamans are going to be down here below the ret paladins in terms of damage, but again, their utility is unmatched. If this was a utility tier list, fury would be B tier, and you know, all these classes would be S tier, okay? But again, this is raw damage numbers. Now we're going to talk about the enhancement shaman a little bit. Obviously, this is going to be dual wield enhancement shaman. Again, brings all the same benefits as elemental shaman. You have all of those totems. You have your bloodlust. You have an instant raid spot pretty much no matter what. Even if you're not in a guild and you're trying to pug, you're going to have no problems getting into a raid on an enhancement shaman or an elemental shaman or a resto shaman. Again, because you need 5 per 25-man raid. Okay, that's crazy. That means 20% of every raid group is shamans. So you will have a spot. However, their raw damage output, I'm going to put them right here, right above elemental. They're very, very close. Obviously, some fights favor classes and specs over others. So this does change depending on the boss fight in phase 1. But enhancements damage is going to be right there alongside elemental shamans. Now for our mages, right? Mages, for the most part, you could play Fire, which is slightly lower DPS, but you're going to be playing Arcane in Phase 1, and Mages are a solid A tier. I would put them right at the top of the A tier. They put out insane amounts of damage, especially with faster, you know, kill times in these raids. The bosses are dying quicker, Mages are going a lot less. Maybe they only require, you know, a quick innervate here and there, but they probably don't even need that in most groups, especially if you have a Shadow Priest in there pumping that mana battery for everybody. Like, Mages are going to do crazy damage. They may even sneak their way up into S tier, but as far as the sims go, if everyone is playing perfectly, mages are going to be, you know, right at the top of A tier, kind of squeaking into S tier for our arcane mages. Fire, I would put you kind of at the bottom of A tier, okay? Now we have our Shadow Priests. Again, extremely valuable to the raid. You're bringing fort, you're that mana battery for everybody. Every single group is going to need a Shadow Priest. You're going to be, you know, improving your warlocks damage in raid, your shadow locks. So Shadow Priest, again, every 25-man raid needs at least 1 Shadow Priest, and your Shadow Priest damage is going to be sitting kind of right down here, you know, right next to the shamans. Just a respectable hybrid DPS. But again, all of these classes bring insane utility to every single raid, so I don't want to deter anyone from playing them. You know, we just recruited our Shadow Priest last night, and I'm super pumped about it because they really do help the raid so much. Okay, and now we're going to talk about rogues a little bit. So rogues, you know, there's this weird, I guess, stigma for rogues going into TBC. In terms of PvP, we all know rogue is literally the god class of TBC. Rogue and mage are just, and druid are incredible in PvP and TBC. But in terms of PvE content, in phase 1, you can pump on a rogue depending on your group comp and your raid. But in terms of like perfect sims, rogues are actually going to be down here under Retribution Paladins. Again, this is going off of the sims. In your raid, you might be top DPS on a rogue. But in a perfect scenario, your rogues are going to be, you know, slightly under your ret paladins. However, again, extremely valuable to bring to raid because they bring improved exposed armor. So remember that. You can play your rogue. There's probably going to be 1 rogue spot in, like, you know, super optimal raid comps. You're going to bring 1 rogue, but you can definitely bring at least like 2 or 3 if you have them, and you're not going for that mega optimal comp in your raids. And you know, that's okay. You know, rogues get better and better as the expansion goes on, and improved exposed armor is extremely valuable. So, you know, don't re-roll your rogue just because you watched this video. Next, we have the warlocks, right? Warlocks are what people remember as like the undisputed kings, aside from BM Hunter, of TBC. However, the sims are showing a little bit different data this time, right? So warlocks, you know, according to the Sims and kind of in my personal opinion from playing on the PTR, absolute pumpers. Destro Lock destroys, right? You know, Shadow or Fire. You do insane amounts of damage if you have a Shadow Priest. I think Shadow performs a little bit better, but don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% on that. You know, Destro Locks absolutely pump. I'm going to put Destro Locks, you know, I honestly think that they're going to be behind mages in the A tier. Still an extremely valuable class, really, really solid. But I don't think that they're going to hit those numbers of Fury Warrior and, you know, BM Hunter DPS in phase 1, even in full BIS. And the problem is, like, classes like Warrior will scale even harder as the expansion goes on. BM Hunter is solid the entire way through. But I think Warlock is respectable. It's going to be right there, kind of neck and neck with Mage, maybe slightly under on some fights and slightly over on others. And it will probably even beat Warrior and BM Hunter on certain fights, right? But this is, again, just raw simming data. So now we have our Hunter, right? We're going to focus mainly on BM because that is like the, you know, the most common rating spec, especially in the beginning of TBC. Keep in mind, you can play Marksman, right? According to the Sims, BM Hunter is simming 400-ish DPS higher than Fury Warrior. Okay, so BM Hunter would be here, and then Marksman Hunter in phase 1 would be kind of right neck and neck with Warrior. BM Hunter is just light years ahead of Fury Warrior, and Marksman Hunter would be tied a little bit higher than Fury Warrior, but still ahead of Fury Warrior in terms of raw DPS output. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't I put any classes in C and D tier? And that's because I don't personally believe any classes belong in the C or D tier in TBC. Yes, this tier list is talking about raw damage numbers, but the problem is these classes... These pumper classes can't pump without these classes, right? So these classes, none of them are C or D tier. They're all B tier. They're all roughly the same amount of damage. I mean, we could argue and go like this and bring these kind of down here. Because I think Arms and Feral are going to pump a little bit harder than most of these. Maybe even Red Pally would be up in the B tier. And this is probably a little bit more accurate. But I just don't want to deter people from playing these classes. Their damage isn't that bad. Like I said, in your raid group, you might be a top DPS. But anyways, guys, this is the gist of how classes are going to perform in full BIS in phase 1. For, you know, between 60 seconds and 120 second boss fights. Take it with a grain of salt. It could change. Things could change as we move into these raids, but this is just a general idea. I have a lot of you that have been asking me to do this, and I really wasn't going to, but I figured, you know what, there's so many people asking for it, so I might as well do it. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like the video, share it with somebody. Follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/hammerdance. Again, I stream Monday through Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern, and we're having a good time over there. We're going to be live a lot throughout the launch of TBC. And we're pushing for Twitch partners, so if you want to support me in any way, come over there and hang out. Subscribe to the channel if you love Classic WoW just as much as me. But anyways, guys, thank you all so much for watching and listening in. I'll see you all in the next one.